So what if the existence of hell wasn't a matter of faith at all, but something you could arrive at through pure logic? Today, we're going to dig into a really fascinating source that makes exactly that claim. We're going to set aside scripture and dogma for a bit and explore 8 arguments for hell built entirely on reason. Let's see what they're all about.
This is the big question, right? It's something people have wondered about for basically all of human history. But instead of looking to ancient texts or divine revelation for the answer, the author here says, nope, we can figure this out with just cold, hard reason.
And this is a really important point for how we're going to talk about this. This explainer isn't about debating what you or I believe. Our goal is just to walk through the author's chain of reasoning, step by step, and really understand how they build their logical case for hell.
So here's how we're going to break it all down. We'll start with that foundational question, of course. Then we'll dive into the first batch of arguments, which are all about universal balance. After that, we're going to shift gears to arguments based on a moral order. And finally, we'll see how the author ties this all together in their conclusion.
Okay, so these first 4 arguments are pretty wild because they draw analogies from the physical world. The author basically looks at principles from science and metaphysics and says, hey, for reality to even work, to be stable, it has to be perfectly balanced.
The very first argument kind of treats the cosmos like a big math equation. It's borrowing from physics. You know that whole for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction thing? So the idea is, if heaven represents a +1 of positive energy in the universe, then for the whole equation to equal 0, there must be a -1 of negative energy to balance it out. And that -1, you guessed it, is what the author calls hell.
All right, let's move on to a language the universe seems to really get, mathematics. The author asks us to picture reality as one of those 3-dimensional coordinate systems you remember from math class. In this analogy, heaven would be somewhere in that positive space, a location defined by all positive values, x, y, z.
And if you have a positive quadrant, well, in a symmetrical system like that, it just logically implies that there has to be a negative mirror image quadrant. So if heaven is at x, y, z, there has to be a corresponding -x, -y, -z. And the author points to that spot and says that's hell.
This next argument leans on that ancient idea of duality, the one symbolized by the Tai Chi. The whole concept is that we can only understand things through their opposites. You can't really grasp up without down or light without dark. Well, applying that same logic, the author argues that the very concept of heaven just doesn't make sense without its direct opposite, hell.
So this argument takes that whole duality thing and pushes it a little further into the idea of balance, using yin and yang. Think of yang as all the active, expansive, bright forces, which the author links to heaven and our physical world. But for there to be cosmic harmony, you have to have yin, the passive, contracting, darker forces, to balance it all out. And the author's conclusion? Hell is the necessary yin to heaven's yang.
All right, let's shift gears a little bit here into our second set of arguments. The author moves away from the laws of physics and starts talking about the laws of morality and justice. The big idea in this section is that for the universe to have any meaning, our actions have to have real, ultimate consequences.
So argument number 5 is called the debt balance law, and it starts with a principle of justice that pretty much everyone understands. Debts have to be paid. The author just expands this idea from money to morality. If you think about evil deeds as a kind of cosmic debt, well, then there must be a system in place to make sure those debts eventually get settled. And that leads the author to pose this really challenging question. Think about the unfairness of life, right? Some people are born with everything, and others are born into incredible hardship. This is presented as evidence. The argument is that without some ultimate system of reward and punishment, like heaven and hell, these huge differences would make the universe feel totally random and unjust.
This next argument is a little different. It's not based on an abstract principle. It's based on just looking at the world around us. The author points to some of the most awful parts of human experience to build this part of their case.
The author brings up real-world situations of such unbelievable suffering that we actually use the phrase, a hell on earth, to describe them. The logic here is kind of like, look, if a hellish state of being can exist right here in our physical reality, doesn't that suggest that a bigger, metaphysical, ultimate version of hell could also exist?
Okay, the 7th argument is laid out like a formal logical proof. So let's just walk through it. It starts with a premise. The Tao, or the fundamental nature of the universe, is just. Step 2. For justice to exist, you need both rewards and punishments. Step 3. Heaven is the reward for those who are perfect. So to complete the system, there has to be a punishment for the flawed. And that, the author concludes, must be hell. And now for the final argument. We're back to another analogy from the natural world. This one's really interesting. Reality is pictured as this vast spiritual ecosystem. And just like a forest needs everything from predators to plants to bugs to thrive, the author says the spiritual world has its own diverse population: gods, angels, saints, regular people, all the way down to demons, monsters, and ghosts.
And this all leads to a final, really pointed question. In this big spiritual ecosystem, where exactly do beings like ghosts live? If every creature needs a natural habitat, what's theirs? And the answer, of course, that the author is leading us to is hell.
So there we have it. We've gone through all 8 of the author's arguments, 4 that were rooted in universal balance and 4 based on moral order. So now, let's pull all these threads together and see what the author's final conclusion is.
You see how the author pulled from all over the place, right? Physics, math, Eastern philosophy, ideas about justice. Each argument is designed to kind of lock in with the others, creating this big web of logical connections.
And here it is, the ultimate point. Based on this entire chain of reasoning, the author's final thought is that hell isn't just some story or a belief, it's a logical requirement for a universe that is balanced, just, and coherent. It's the missing piece that makes the whole puzzle fit.
So, that's the breakdown of these 8 logical arguments. Now, whether you find the reasoning totally convincing or not, it does leave us with a pretty powerful question to think about. What is this core idea of cosmic balance? Of action and consequence, of debt and repayment. What does that mean for how we actually choose to live our lives?